This is a sister district project interview with Jenn Alford-Teaster, running for New Hampshire's 8th State Senate District. I'm Sarah Fishman. Jenn, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're very busy. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself to start off?
Yes, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That stained glass there of the bird.
I lived with a woman in high school who took care of me, and she made that about 30 years ago.
Oh, that is gorgeous.
Yeah, she
Anyway,
gifted it to me
sorry
about
to
10 years ago.
interrupt, but
It's okay. Thank you for acknowledging that. I'll let her know that you appreciate it. It's beauty. I grew up in New Hampshire. I grew up the daughter of a single mom who had 3 kids before she was 18. And when my mom was 23, she had my brother. When my dad left us, we moved in with my grandmother, who had recently been widowed. We lived in poverty my entire childhood. Between my grandmother and my mother, they worked minimum wage jobs to put food on the table. So when I turned 18, I had moved to North Carolina with $265 and 2 suitcases and got my own minimum wage job, making $4.35 an hour. And I had been working at this coffee shop for, I don't know, sometime under a year, and I had passed out at work because I could only afford to eat every couple of days. And the folks I work for encouraged me to go to college, which at the time had never occurred to me because I thought that college was for rich kids. But in North Carolina, when you're in state, it was $2,000 a semester. So I worked 3 jobs and put myself through my undergraduate degree and earned a scholarship to my first master's degree in applied geography. And I worked at a fire department for a couple of years and moved home to New Hampshire, got a second master's degree in public health at UNH. And I've been working at Dartmouth for the last 12 years. I work in the biomedical data sciences division of the Geisel School of Medicine. I use maps studying access to healthcare services. Last summer, I had met a young woman who was dropping her son off at our daycare, my daughter's daycare. And she'd go work at the Dunkin' Donuts all day. And she made me think of my grandmother, who would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get all 4 of us kids ready for school, and then go to work at the Burger King all day. And that woman inspired me to run for office because I thought, I know how hard it is to work your way out of poverty. And this woman needs a path out of poverty, just like I needed one. And so I thought, I'm going to do it. I'll run for Senate, and I will work to create economic opportunities for folks like her.
That is a lot of a long story of success that you've put into a short paragraph. I realize there must have been a lot of challenges there.
Yes.
In between the bigger challenges.
Yes.
So you mentioned the owners of the coffee shop. What else do you think helped you succeed that you would want to promote as a legislator, if there was something that enabled you to move forward?
You know, there are a lot of people I've met along the way who saw potential in me when I didn't see that potential. And part of the race, part of the participation in this campaign for me is about showing people that people who grow up in difficult circumstances are worth the effort, are worth the investment. Kids who grow up in difficult circumstances face a lot of challenges, and it's the accumulation of adults and individuals in their community that help to show them the possibilities outside of their home environment. And I want to be one of those people that can show them that I believe in you. I believe that if you're given enough resources, that you can make your way out of these circumstances. I think as I'm canvassing around the district, I'm seeing a lot of families who are struggling, a lot of women who have multi-generational homes and they have their kids living with them. Everyone's working full time, but the ability to put food on the table and pay for a mortgage is incredibly difficult. And I want to be that representative that says, you know, it's more than just advocacy. I am that return on investment, and I need people to see that. They need to see that these social programs, these investments in our community have an impact. And a lot of people who come from my circumstance that I've met along the way, they're too busy putting food on the table and paying bills to be able to run for office. And I've gotten to a place in my career where I can do this. And I think it's really important for other people to see a counter to the narrative that poor people are lazy and that they're not trying and that it's on them if they can't pull themselves out of poverty. So, yeah,
That's very powerful. And the minimum wage in New Hampshire is still several dollars below that of Vermont and Maine. So does that, the risk of focusing on something very specific, is that part of the continuing challenge for people?
well, so in New Hampshire, we don't have a state minimum wage. We go by the federal minimum wage, which is
Oh, I see, which is only $7.25 an
that's right.
hour.
Yes. And so, and people mistakenly have this perception that most of the people who work on minimum wage are young adults, teenagers, and college students, and that's simply not true. The New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute has a great white paper on the minimum wage in New Hampshire, and it's people in their 20s and 30s, and one of the things I know in the district, with anecdotally with people that I'm talking to, they work 2 and 3 minimum wage jobs to be able to pay for healthcare, insurance premiums. And I'm talking older people in their 50s and 60s who should be thinking about retirement, having to piece together part-time work in order to make ends meet. So when we're talking about increasing the minimum wage, we're talking about people who want to work, who are working, and are working really hard to just scrape together a living wage. So what becomes problematic in New Hampshire is when you put a specific number on it. I think I've read that, I mean, with the general populace, that I think I had read that in order to have a truly living wage in New Hampshire, it should be about $18 an hour. But the minute you give a dollar number to that, people just recoil and think, well, why should I pay somebody $18 or $12 to serve me a hamburger? But what most people don't realize is that the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. It doesn't keep up with the rising costs of living. I mean, I made $4.35 an hour 20 years ago, and it's $3 more, not even $3 more.
Nothing. Yeah.
So, yes. So, and a large proportion of the people who are making those minimum wage jobs are women, single moms. So, there's a misperception about the types of people who have these jobs, particularly here. And I think that, there's a couple of ways to address that. One is changing and educating people about the actual population that lives on the minimum wage. And then also why it's important to incrementalize and increase the minimum wage so people who live here and are in the service industry aren't working in poverty. So I used to volunteer at our church's homeless shelter. It was supposed to be an emergency homeless shelter that was only supposed to be open for 1 or 2 seasons, and it ended up being open for almost 10 years in the wintertime.
And you worked there a long time, didn't you? You worked there like 6 years?
6 years. And most of the people who came through there were either severely mentally ill and not regulated in terms of their medication and the support services they need, or working poor. People who would work full time but could not afford last month's rent, or had serious health issues. There was a couple there who the gentleman had MS. I mean, and the wife was his primary caretaker. So she couldn't work full time because she was full time taking care of him. I mean, truly debilitating. And, when in the wintertime they'd sleep at the cold weather shelter, but in the summer, that man with MS is sleeping in a tent on the side of a river. So people have this misunderstanding of what poverty is in New Hampshire. But if you work with the homeless population, you'll see predominantly most of them are working poor.
You had an interesting phrase to describe your young daughter. You said she was the first generation middle class person in your family. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very effective phrase for describing what you've just explained, that it is what it is, what you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that I found compelling about the young boy at my daughter's school is he was about Bertie's age. Bertie's my daughter's name. And I would think about him and his mom and how what it was like when I was young. Even though my mom and my grandmother worked very hard to put food on our table, there was an element of food insecurity and housing insecurity. We moved around quite a bit. When my grandmother moved to Pennsylvania to take care of her dying mom, we ended up on welfare and food stamps and Section 8. And there's an element of insecurity there. And I would think about this young boy and I would think about Birdie, how that child never worries about anything. She never has to worry about where her next meal is coming from. She never has to worry about losing her housing. You know,
Well, she shouldn't
barring
have to. No child should.
no child should have to worry about that. And I thought that young boy, Andrew, is equally as precious as Birdie is. He deserves a good start in life. Things should be fair for him too. So yeah, I mean, I often look at Birdie and contrast her and her experience to what I experienced and what that young boy is experiencing.
Do you
And
think do you think being a mother, sorry I interrupted, do you think being a mother makes this a more informed journey for you? Do you think being a mother makes it easier for you to take this on and that you'll be better at the job and all that? Because that's a realization you just described based on having a child. So just wondering.
um, I would have only had the experience of the comparative aspect of it by having a child and going to daycare, because like otherwise I wouldn't be at a daycare. But I I'm a very empathetic and compassionate person, and I would have come to this conclusion otherwise. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely think that kids are a strong return on investment. I mean, we're talking about a very aging state here in New Hampshire, and people are wondering where and why the next generation are not wanting to stay here. And I think part of it is because, there's a active campaign to dismantle public education and make it harder for people. So, you know, being a mom is incredibly important role in my life. It's not the only reason why I care about other people's families. I think that woman just had such a striking resemblance to my mom and my grandmother that seeing that and seeing Andrew and seeing her just made me feel like I needed to put my very unique story to good use for other people who are working and want to move out of poverty.
No,
You
it's
know?
very compelling. So you've started to touch on this. What issues matter most to you?
uh, Public education, because even though I grew up poor, I grew up in a well-funded school district on the seacoast. So there were resources for me as a child when my family was experiencing difficulty. Um, I had teachers take interest in me, and I was able to um, seek counseling, and they intervened when we were having difficulty at home. And I think that allowed me to stay on track with my academics. And I mean, as evidence today, like I'm a highly productive member of society, and that's the goal for what people want. But I required resources as a young person. And I think, teachers now are asked to do so much. And so looking at some of the efforts underway to defund public education, I think that is just a bad course of action for New Hampshire. So that's very important to me. Also, I think there should be an alternative to four-year degree here in New Hampshire, not a replacement, but an alternative. Not everyone, particularly in my district, wants to get a four-year degree, wonders how that return on investment is. There are trades and apprenticeship type work that are really good jobs that you can earn while you learn. And I think that that is something that should be strengthened here in our rural community for folks who don't necessarily want to take on a student loan debt.
Is
Um,
there is there a vocational high school anywhere in southern New Hampshire, or is it not? If there is one, is it not close to you guys, or?
there are voc tech schools in New Hampshire. So some of them have stronger programs than others. There's nothing really strong in our district. There is, so like if someone wanted to go become a plumber, they have to go to Manchester for that training, which is about a 45-minute drive from Sutton, where I am. And my district's really large. It's 24 towns. So if you're talking Langdon, which is an hour from where I am to the west, you could be driving an hour and a half. So some of it is about creating geographic access for these programs, and where there is somewhat of a basic uh, foundation, like in Newport, they have some voc tech, but it's not strong. And then there's Claremont, which is just outside of the district, strengthening that for folks who want that as an alternative. I think that is a fair alternative. Plus, I've learned that there's a shortage of like 2,000 plumbers in New Hampshire. Like, those are great jobs. You don't have to mortgage your career by getting absorbent student loans. So I just think it should be an equal option for folks.
So what are the biggest differences between you and your opponent?
Um, well, I mean, there are a lot of differences between us. There's some policy-based differences. For example, she is a strong supporter of school choice. So Senate Bill 193 is called school choice. It's a voucher bill that would have given $3,600 to individuals who want to spend their money in a private or religious institution or homeschool. The problem with the school voucher bill is that this $3,600, which is the identified adequacy funding for a child from the state's contribution, is that money, once that taxpayer dollars, once it's taken out of the state system, there's no accountability for that. So you have no idea whether or not they're meeting a standard. But it's framed as though it's the parent's choice. Well, what's also additionally problematic about that is whether or not you have 25 students in a classroom versus 23, you still have to pay for the teacher. You still have to pay for the buildings and the facilities. So what ends up happening is there's an estimated downshifting of taxes from the state to property tax owners who are disproportionately burdened, particularly in our rural community, up to $290 million. So it's a crushing property tax burden that would then be layered on top of families who are already struggling. So that's a big difference between the two of us.
So did that legislation pass, or
no,
is it?
It didn't. But she has said that if she is reelected, she will push it again.
So other issues in which there's a big difference to you?
Well, there are lots of differences between us. So, she often talks about how she is a proponent of the environment. But what I like to tell people is there's a difference between wanting to protect open spaces because you like to hike in them and then making investments in renewable energies and other alternatives to dependency on fossil fuels. So there's a narrative around her because she is a volunteer at a local land trust that she's good for the environment. But if you look at her history, that's not true. So
At a voting record?
Yes, if you look at her voting record. So for me, the ability to support legislation that decreases our dependency on fossil fuels is being a good environmentalist, while also considering our natural resources and making sure that we protect open space in New Hampshire, which is really important, not just for our way of life, but also for tourism and recreation.
How much of the economy is tourism? Do you have a good sense of that?
I don't know.
Probably a big chunk, though,
It
right?
is. It is.
Mm-hmm. So that's important at multiple levels. So now this is one thing that just was very striking to me when I was looking at background on you was your opponent's in the past support of, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but she supported giving money to schools for guns in the schools or something like that. Am I getting that?
I don't know about that. I don't know if that's true or not. There was a bill sponsored by Senator Hennessy in District 5 to give the schools local control about whether or not guns were allowed on the property.
Right. And she said it would be dangerous to have the guns banned because, is that right?
Yeah, she said that she thought it would make the school a target. So there are a couple of layers of why that's problematic. Like from her perspective, the inconsistency of her record, right? So like school choice is about giving individuals choices, right? Like let's give individuals choices. We want to place the responsibility on those in the community because they know best. Except when it comes to guns, no, we're going to decide that, like she didn't think that the school district should choose. That should, that just sweeping.
State versus the school district.
Right,
That's,
exactly.
yep.
It's very, that, oh, well, in this instance, we think the state should say guns are allowed, so that's problematic because it's morally inconsistent to say, well, for this one thing, we'll give the state control, but on this other thing, because it supports her philosophies of folks having access to guns. So she is a supporter of the repeal of the concealed carry. She is proud of that she carries. And I don't know anything about the arming of teachers. I have not heard that, but from her. But
Well, I could be getting it wrong.
I don't know.
Yeah. So you've been quoted as saying that you believe what you believe, and you're also a gun owner. So is that I have this perhaps Cambridge, Massachusetts sort of Somerville bias about guns. Is this very common in New Hampshire to own a gun for a variety of reasons? And it how is that something that has to be reconciled with your position, or is it totally two separate things, or how would you?
Well, so in where I am in New Hampshire, I'm in a very rural community. There's a very active and thriving hunting population. Like people love to hunt. I mean, they eat deer, moose, bear. I mean, I have bear, moose, deer. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, but I have a gun because I live in a very rural area, and we have a lot of animals that come through here. And even though I expect to never have to use those weapons, I would if it meant the protection of my child from a rabid or sick animal. I mean, they're they're used.
That's kind of what I thought you would say.
Yeah, I mean that
Yeah.
is a very common. Um, I mean, I don't really know anybody on my street who doesn't own a gun. I mean, that's just, I have a shotgun and a rifle, and those are the types of weapons that most people around here have because they're hunters. And people use hunting to, have food, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, even as a vegetarian. But in terms of common sense gun violence prevention legislation. Most people I talk to, even the people that I canvass who are undecided, lean Republicans, don't think there's anything wrong with having universal background checks. Um, there's, I personally have not seen the hyper partisan, don't take my gun from me. Like, I just have not seen that when I'm out canvassing and campaigning with people. Most people don't see it as problematic to do universal background checks or have limited or no access to military grade weapons. I mean, most people I talk to think that just makes sense. Um,
You don't need that to do the kind of protection
no,
and
you don't need an assault rifle to,
assault. Nobody needs an assault weapon in
yeah. So
that
I'm not
situation.
seeing that. I don't think that the average civilian should have access to military grade weapons. My father-in-law is a retired corrections officer. I know lawyers and police officers, and in order to be competent with guns, you have to practice with them regularly. Um, I just don't really I don't, and it's my understanding that the proportion of the population that has or is interested in these types of weapons is pretty small. So I don't understand the intensified narrative around making it seem like people want to take your guns away. I do think that in the gun violence prevention discussion, particularly in New Hampshire, that we need to talk about mental health services here because my husband is the facilities director for the state psychiatric hospital. Um, you know, it is well commonly understood that mental health support here is very underfunded. It contributes to lots of issues across the community, um, drives issues with workforce, and I think that if we're talking about gun violence prevention, we also need to be talking about making sure that there's adequate funding for mental health services here in the state, because those two things act in tandem together. Um, so that's how I feel about that.
I should have asked you before about the area you live in and sort of its demographics and how it's very rural, as you said, right?
Mhm.
And it's um, a lot of it's not, how far is it from Concord?
Where I live is 30 minutes from Concord.
Well, it's
But
not.
like I have a friend, but when you come up to visit, you'll once you leave Concord, it gets pretty rural. I mean, you know, there are
You
times, so it's 24 towns. We don't have like a city per se. Like we have New London. There are areas where there are increased population, but it's like maybe you have a mile where it's like a main street and it's very rural. I mean, there are times when I'm out canvassing and my GPS unit drops out, or I have to put the truck in four-wheel drive just to get down the road. There are some pretty isolated individuals in this area. So if you're looking at the rural urban commuting codes for this area, which is one of the designations for rurality, mostly it's small town and isolated rural. There are some large towns, but even that, and the perception is that it's pretty. I have a friend who tell me when he comes, he tells me he thinks I live out past the Notch, which is like a 3-hour drive from Concord, but because it feels so different when you come out here, the perceptions are just different.
You had a story that I heard you give on a podcast about meeting a neighbor of yours who's a mile and a half away for the
Yeah,
first time,
yeah,
and she was on a horse, right? And that
yeah. She
was
came to
it
visit
was
me
a
on her
she was
horse.
a neighbor,
So
but
I
she was
used
on
to,
a horse.
yeah, I used to. I mean, I'm a runner, and when I first moved to Sutton 6 years ago, I was out training for a half marathon, and I met Chris. She lives about a mile and a half up the road. I mean, I have other neighbors that are closer to me, but that's kind of the mental map you make when you live in an area like this. Someone who lives about a mile up the road is still considered a neighbor. And
It's
so,
so different from where I am,
yes,
where yeah, it's a very different, yeah.
it's a very different perception. So, and I think that's really important to understand when we're talking about the gun violence prevention too, because the perception of guns here is just very different. Like
Yes.
they are a tool for hunting. Um, so it's not something you see a lot of people talking about in terms of personal protection. At least I don't. In this area, it's mostly about hunting and protection in the sense that if you have a critter in the yard or something that's unpredictable in that way. But I don't. I mean, it's just a very different way of living, and so yeah, so Chrissy, well, after I met her, the next day she came down to my house on the back trails on a horse. I mean, like you can get to my house by trails from her house, and so you can't do that in a city.
No,
And it was like the best
there
thing.
are no such things.
Yeah.
Yes, horse. Well, there are, but they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So as you're doing a lot of door knocking, I
Yeah.
was looking at your Facebook page. As you go around, what are people telling you? What are you hearing a lot of in terms of issues that people are concerned about?
So it's important to understand that the universe of voters that I'm talking to are predominantly, they're listed as undecided, but they are predominantly lean Republican or Republican. So most of the folks that I talk to are really worried about economic insecurity. The opioid crisis is a big deal here. Lots of families are having to start over when they should be thinking about retirement, taking in grandchildren, grandniece, family members who they're trying to help stabilize, provide housing for, young kids moving in with grandparents. I sometimes, or usually early on, I was hearing a lot of folks talk to me about national politics, which is okay, except that because I don't have a lot of name recognition, I really try to draw them down to the state and how the state has more direct impact on their day to day than national policies would. So some of it is just a little bit of an education about what state senate does. But predominantly, the issues that people are talking to me about are economic prosperity, economic insecurity. There is a frustration for a lot of folks about the hyper partisan place that we're at in politics. And
Nationally, or is it the same at the state level?
same at the state level too. I think I've had some people say I'm a lifelong Republican, and I'm embarrassed to say that because of just how awful the discourse is around social issues. Um, I've had people tell me that they're voting for a Democrat for the first time in their life. I met a woman at the poll yesterday I had canvassed a month ago. She said she's never voted in a Democratic primary. She's always been listed as undecided, but has always done a Republican primary. And she said, I have so many great candidates on the Republican side. She's like, but I just wanted to vote for you so badly. I decided to do a Democratic primary for the first time in my life. Yeah. And I said, wow. It's like,
that's
that
amazing.
that just felt really powerful because when I came to canvass her, she thought I was just like every other person who'd come to her door, and this is a woman who is, taking care of a domestic violence survivor whose husband tried to kill her. She had a 6-inch scar on her neck from not the woman I canvassed, but her friend who was there, 6-inch scar on her neck from her husband trying to stab her. She's taking care of her adult son who is working full time but can't afford housing. Her husband has untreated PTSD. I mean, this woman is carrying the weight of her family.
Wow.
And when I showed up, she was like, "What are you going to do for me?" I said, "Well, why don't I just tell you about myself, and then we can have a conversation about what your needs are." And so I told her about my experience, and she said, "Oh, you're one of us. You know what it's like to struggle." I was like, "Yeah, I do. That's why I'm doing this for people like you who are still struggling." And so that those are pretty powerful experiences to have with people.
It seems like it's both identifying with the person based on your past, but also then operationalizing what you've learned or what you've gained from succeeding. It's at two different levels, and I imagine it eventually, or maybe already, makes you very effective at connecting with people and eventually, serving in the legislature.
So yes, so my campaign manager had said something to me one day. She said, "Jenn, you just have this way of investing in the people you're talking to, learning about them and then finding a way to help bring out the best in them." And that's completely my intention. I think there are a lot of folks who just constantly talk about policy and fail to sort of connect that with the individuals who are on the receiving end of those policies. I think what's so powerful about the people that I talk to, because of the universe of voters that I'm talking to, is that these issues are real, they're textured, they are powerful, they're sad, but these people are survivors, and I think given how I know that feels, that fuels my the intensity for which I approach the work, and their faces are with me. I think of them all the time. And when I get to the State House, they will be there with me in that room when I advocate for legislation that will improve their lives. And I tell them that.
Yeah.
I tell them that,
It's very authentic. You can't say, "Oh, that didn't happen to you." So, yeah.
Well, sometimes I feel that one of the things that is challenging is that sometimes you just have more of an authority with people when you've been through something similar than if you simply have sympathy. Like advocates are amazing and necessary, and compassion and tenderness and care are so important, even without the lived experience. For some folks, they need to know you've had that lived experience to gain credibility with them. And I know that feeling because I've been through that.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I know that feeling because I've been through it. I've been the child at a dinner where people are giving gifts out at Christmas because they want to, give back to the community, but then you're getting a gift that says nothing about you from a complete stranger, and you understand you're getting it as charity. And so people don't like to feel like charity. I didn't like feeling like charity. I don't like to feel like charity. I don't see these people as charity. I see them as hardworking individuals who need a little bit of help because they're struggling. All they're doing is surviving. They're not living a life, they're surviving a life, and I know what that feels like, and people see that in me, and I want them to know that I care.
And that you've made the transition. You use the line a lot, surviving to thriving.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to appear a lot.
Yes, and that's what I want for everyone.
Right.
If
Right.
you're working hard and you're working a full-time job, if you're working to the best of your capacity, you should be able to have something to show for that. A little bit of financial security, a little bit of food security, housing security. And I see a lot of families who just do not have that despite putting in all effort otherwise.
So speaking of work,
Mm-hmm.
please define, for those of us who need it, what geospatial research is. Which is what you do, right?
Yeah, so I have a master's degree in applied geography from UNC Greensboro. I have a post-baccalaureate in geographic information systems from the same institution, and I have a second master's degree in public health from UNH. I use maps to study access to healthcare services. So the portfolio of work that I have has predominantly focused in cancer care research with breast cancer. I work in the biomedical data sciences division of the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth College. I have an affiliation with the Norris Cotton Cancer Center. So we use geography to understand how people have access to healthcare services. We've moved into the realm of rural cancer care to facilitate a greater understanding of what are some of the perceptions that keep people from getting screened or getting access to treatment. That's a relatively new pursuit for our group, but it's really interesting and meaningful, especially considering the timing of doing the race that I'm doing because our district is so rural. But I have a focus on, I previously had a focus on developing methods and refining methods for how we understand geographic access, but now we're moving towards perception of access and how rural context affects that perception of access.
And has that been used to, is it at a stage where it can be operationalized to create more mobile clinic kinds of resources, or is that kind of removed from what you do?
So the translational science aspect of it is not a place where we're at right now. It is a place we're working towards. So it informs some of the work at the Cancer Center, of course, because we are hyper focused on the catchment area, which includes Vermont and New Hampshire. But in terms of the direct translational science aspect of it, we're still working on that aspect.
Yeah, there's probably a lot to do there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to shift into how can we help you now that we've presented you as this person who obviously should be elected.
Thank you.
Who or what group has been especially helpful to you, do you think, and especially as a first-time candidate? Have you had any really, good mentoring relationships or type of training, or is there anything that's been really helpful that other people could make use of?
Well, yes, there are lots of people in this process that have been incredibly helpful. And there are people, there are organizations. So starting out, like Senator Feltus, who's a senator in Concord, he was incredibly helpful because he just gave me the introductory conversation about what it would look like to do a Senate run, the types of accommodations I might need to do for work. He's a close friend of mine too, so we can have a really honest and frank conversation about what his process looked like, what I would need to prepare for and think about. The caucus has been fantastic. The Democratic caucus, particularly Ben Ernst, who is the Senate caucus campaign director, and Nick Taylor, who is the House and Senate caucus director. They are wonderful. Early on, I did a training with Emily's List. Brett Cooper, who was the former Northeast Political Regional Director, who's moved on to the DLCC now, has been fantastic. Molly Cowan has been supporting our race. emotionally and tactically. She's wonderful.
Who is
You know,
she?
Molly Cowan, she's the Northeast political director now for Emily's List. So when Brett moved on, she took on his role. She's also a select woman in Exeter, which is great. So she has the political experience. She's been really helpful. Senator Susie, of course, she's wonderful. Senator Hennessy. I mean, all these people have just been helping in terms of understanding the process, providing support, checking in, getting involved. Also, I have a fantastic organizer who lives with me from the coordinated campaign, Josh Gravely. He's amazing. He's been here since June. It's been great providing supporter housing because we talk regularly about what he's hearing, and then we can help support each other in the campaign. It's just been a really
How
there are
about
just many people who are my husband, who's been great. My boss has been incredibly supportive. Yeah.
how about the U.S. Congress delegation, which is all female in New Hampshire, isn't it?
Yes. So I see Congresswoman Custer and Senator Hassan somewhat regularly, actually, and they're very, supportive and, you know, kind. They're not actively involved in the race, but I see them quite frequently. And they're always asking, "How's it going? We see what you're doing on social media. We think this is great." Very supportive. But they're not actively involved in the campaign. I think largely that's because previous to the primary, there's been so many. There's been the governor race that's of interest, and then they're working on their own. Well, I mean, Congresswoman Custer's working on her own campaign, but they are supportive.
So why the Senate, the state Senate, not the House? Is it because the House members are Democrats or
Uh,
currently?
uh, Frankly, there are 400 people in the House in New Hampshire.
Right. And there are 24
And
senators,
there's
right?
24 senators. Yes. There are a couple of reasons. One, why not? Like, why not? Like, why not? It's a lot of work, but I'm up for the task. I think the contrast between me and the incumbent is so stark that and there needs to be someone like me representing this district, that I felt like the need was greater, frankly, here, and the impact would be larger. So I'm 41 years old. I don't have time to waste. I want to have the greatest impact where possible, and the Senate seemed like the best place to do that.
Okie dokie. That makes sense. All right. So now there's a key supporter of yours that needs to be named, who has a very big smile and often wears a bandana
Yes.
on the Facebook posts you have. Who is that?
That is Doc, my golden retriever. He is a year old.
He is so cute.
He is so cute. And he's so great to canvas with. He comes with me most days when I canvas. Usually, if he doesn't come with me, it's because I have an event afterwards. Because he's still a puppy. He's only a year old, and he cannot be trusted with food and other things just sitting out. But he has made conversations easier to have. He's a great companion in the truck. He often, roll the window down, he sticks his face out, and he makes it easier to have conversations with people. And
He's
also,
nothing like a dog to break down barriers.
yes,
When I take my dog out, it
yes,
doesn't matter who the people are. The dogs
yes,
just sniff each other. If
yes,
people could be more like that, it would
yes,
be wonderful. There's no
yes,
judgment. They're just
yes.
sniffing. Oh, that's a dog.
Wag more, bark less.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. He's
So
wonderful.
he looks at, and you have other dogs, don't you?
Yes, I have another dog, Pepper. She is a 4-year-old Australian Shepherd. We call her the family introvert. She loves to be at home. We take her out. She gets walked, frequently, but she's not a big fan of being on the leash, so she acts a little crazy. So she doesn't come out with me on the campaign trail, but you will see her in mailers.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. All right. So, what can people like us at Sister District Project who are outside of your district do to help your campaign?
Well, one, thank you for the interest. That's wonderful. The energy is necessary to sustain the effort. I am excited about the postcard writing. That will be wonderful because I've seen some of the pictures with the handwritten notes, and that's just so wonderful. And I hope that that will be an effort that will be done for this campaign. And of course, fundraising, which we've been actively doing since March. We just hit over $100,000 last week, but I've been told that
Congratulations.
we need to raise 150 um, to be competitive in the mailers, to cover the cost of the campaign, um, and phone banking, which would be great. So those are some areas we could use the help.
Excellent. And Sister District Project has done that. They've sent people out of state to even door knock. So don't be afraid to ask
Wonderful.
for whatever you want.
Thank you.
Okay, so is there anything that I did not mention that you wanted to talk about?
Um, well, I think, we've sort of indirectly talked about this, but one thing I want people to know is that the choice to engage in the Senate race is not one of convenience. It's not one for self-aggrandizing. I mean, will be working part-time, which will take a hit financially for my family. But that is a sacrifice because that's how much the need is here. I genuinely want people to know that I care. I care about the people in this district. I care about where New Hampshire is going. I want people here to enjoy their lives. I want the people who are working hard to be rewarded for that hard work by having food security, housing security, and feel hopeful about what they can do for themselves. I think I have a very unique story that I could put to good use for other people. And I hope to get there. I'm working as hard as I can to get there. So just want people to know that.
That is clear. I think that is clear. So thank you so much again for doing this. And, keep in touch and let us know what
I will. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay.